My name is Jake Hiebert. I live here in Barnwell in Tabor area in southern Alberta. And what we're going to do with this podcast is we're going to try and interview people that have done some things or achieved some things, or as we view it, maybe accomplished some things. And hopefully we can learn some things from them, and you, the listener, will be able to learn as well. And maybe we can teach something, and hopefully people are able to change their behavior, change their life, and make life-altering decisions based on information they have gotten from our podcast. That's kind of the objective.
And my name is Daniel Hiebert. I am the co-host of this podcast. I am his son. I am a new mortgage broker and a financial planner, and I'm looking forward to interviewing the people mentioned, and I hope we can extract some valuable information. For today's podcast, though, we will actually be interviewing Jacob Hiebert here, my father, and see what we can get from his career, I guess.
I suppose I should have started off with that, eh?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, but that's all right. I think we get the gist of it.
It probably takes too long if I want to mention all of them.
Yeah.
All the different things I've done, I guess, eh?
Yeah, but you guys will find them out either way in this episode. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a certified financial services representative. That's what I do now. And then some other entrepreneurial things that I suppose we're going to talk about as we go.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess we're going to start with the basic outline of what your careers look like over the last 43 years. That's how old you are. That's not how long.
I am 43 years, yes.
That's not how long you've been working for.
No, well.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So, basically give us a brief overview of your career over the past couple decades. And, what made you transition to each one and what your pivotal moments were.
Okay, pivotal moments. Wow. Okay, well, moving to Canada as a kid was obviously one of them, right? Came to Canada when I was 9 or 10. I think it was 10. 1992. So that would have been 10 years old. Came from a very, very poor background in Mexico and moved here obviously because of better economic circumstances, or my parents were your grandparents were trying to improve the economic circumstances for their family and the next generation, which was us, obviously. And so we ended up in Ontario working for different farmers doing different things. Just seasonal help really is what we were. And there's obviously still a lot of people doing that. And so we would do the picking cucumbers, picking tomatoes, picking peppers, apples, all of these did ginseng for a few years, all of these different things. Until I did that with the family until I believe I was 19. So 1999, very end of 1999. And then I started working for a guy in construction. So that was the beginning of it.
Okay, and what did your education levels look like growing up? When you moved here, were you fluent in English? And
no.
did you graduate high school, or what did that look like?
No. So high school or education by itself is an interesting topic. I think that, and I'll probably run on a bit of a rabbit trail on this. Education is not refined to a classroom. Education should be defined as learning, and it's a lifelong thing, right? And so it doesn't matter your certifiable educational background. What matters, I think, a lot more in terms of whether or not a person can become successful is whether or not they have a desire to learn. And that's lifelong, right? So for me, that was very interesting. I didn't speak a word of English when we came, and went into grade 4 public school, Stratfordville Public School, actually, in Ontario, without speaking any English. They just kind of tossed you in there as English as a second language student. And didn't really accomplish or do anything the first year. And then the second year, obviously I failed the grade. But the second year, they just put you into the next class, which is grade 5. And then went to private school and they just put me in grade 6 there, which in hindsight, that was a mistake because I obviously wasn't prepared for it. I did the first half of grade 6 twice.
So basically you got kind of pushed through the education system without actually, knowing the requirements of the grade. You weren't probably learning much. It was kind of being pushed through.
No, well, the interesting thing about the public school was that the library became my safe haven. I discovered books, and I learned to read myself just by looking at books. I remember the first book I picked up in the public school back then, believe it or not, was the storybook was in illustrative storybook about Jonah and the whale out of the Bible. It's actually a Bible story. And I looked at it and I recognized the story. And I took the book home. I checked it out of the library and I read it. I learned to read that book, and that's how I learned to read English, because I knew the story. So I could see all the pictures and see what they meant. And I learned to form the words, and I basically learned to read that way, right? And that was in public school back then. So you would never see that now, obviously. But yeah, so then grade 6 twice, the first half of grade 6 twice, because we had gone back to Mexico each time. But I love to learn, right? And and still to this day, if I can learn something new, I'm pretty excited about it. But, and so we did, and then obviously mom and dad couldn't afford to put us back into private school, or we moved. I can't remember exactly what it was. And so then I went into grade 8 public school back to Stratfordville, did half of that, and then I dropped out and went to work. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to say, so that puts you at like 19 now, so grade 6 level education or so, 19, working in construction in Ontario.
Yeah.
What happens there?
So one of the things that happened when I met Tina, which is your mom, we got married, so I would have been 8. I met her when I was 17, and at about 18, I was 18 years old, she was 17, and she kind of said she wanted to go back and get her GED, because she had also dropped out fairly young. Wanted to go back and finish her high school and get her GED. And I jumped on board, and we both started at the age of 18, and I got mine done, I think, you were already born, so I would have been 22, I think. We have pictures, or we used to have pictures anyway, where I'm getting my diploma, and I think you're on stage with me as a baby. I think I'm holding you or something, or you're there anyway. But anyway, because my employer, my boss at the time, Paul Squizzato is his name, he gave me the option of going into an apprenticeship, right? Taking the apprenticeship in carpentry, and they needed me to either write an entrance exam or finish my GED. And so I finally just buckled down and finished the GED. So I got that done the year prior to starting the apprenticeship program.
So the whole reason for getting your GED was so that you could go into trade school for carpentry?
So I would say that the whole reason for starting it was because I wanted it completed. The whole school, the thing that finally pushed me over the edge to complete it was so I could get into trade school. I felt embarrassed that I would have to write an entrance exam.
So what was your boss's motive for trying to put you into trade school? Was that for his own benefit?
You know what? I don't actually really know that. That's a question I will pose to him one day, I think. I'm going to have to follow up with him one of these days and go see what he's up to. So I don't know what his motive was.
Maybe we'll have to get him on the podcast.
We'll have to get him on the podcast, yeah, actually. And but one of the things that so we had a conversation. So I worked for him for a total of about 5 years, right? And we had a conversation somewhere about a year, maybe a year and a bit, year and a half, maybe, into me working for him, about whether or not I wanted to start the apprenticeship. And one of his things was he believed that work ethic was more important than information, right? And coming off of a farm background, he actually did say to me one day, the reason that he was interested in hiring me at the time, he had no idea who people of Mennonite background were. When he heard the word Mennonite, he thought Amish, Pennsylvania, right? So I show up on site and I'm driving a car and I'm dressed normal and I speak English, right? And he's like, well, this is not Mennonite. But anyway, but he was very interested in the work ethic that a farming background would bring into the construction, right? He was from Hamilton, not too many farmers around there in the city where he was from. But anyway, so he hired me based on that and a recommendation from who was my coworker at the time. But anyway, so the conversation we had was about whether or not I wanted to go to trade school. And I kind of said, he said, in your future, it may become necessary that you have it. You don't need it to work for me and you don't need it to build a business. And so then he asked me whether or not I would like to build a business out of construction or if I wanted to be a carpenter and work for somebody else. And I kind of hummed and hawed and thought about that a little bit. And finally, he said, you actually have the ability to build a business out of this if you choose, right? You can actually do this. And that was one of the things that really changed my mind about a lot of stuff, because he kind of said, yeah, you can actually do this. So here's this Mexican farm boy.
Now,
right?
at this point in your life, obviously he's presenting you the opportunity that, hey, you have a future in contracting if you want it.
Yeah.
But had you gone into construction with the intention
of
starting a business one day?
No,
or
absolutely not.
Looking for a job, somewhere to work?
Yep. I wanted to provide for my family. You guys were little. Well, not when I started. That was before we were married, actually. We got married during the time that I was working for him. But really all I wanted was to go to work, produce a good income, have a house that's paid for, and that's really all I had set my mind on.
So is it fair to say that your boss, Paul, he, in a sense, showed, like, even gave you the option of being like a contractor or run your own business? Like, prior to that, that wasn't even a possibility.
That was never a possibility, no. Not before that. So if I had not met him, there may have been other people that might have introduced me to it. That's a possibility. But he was the first one to do that in my world, in my realm. Yeah.
Okay, and what happened from there?
So he gave me the opportunity, and he said, if you decide to do that, become a carpenter and then start a business and pursue carpentry and construction as a business, then I will train you differently than if you want to just be a carpenter and work for somebody else. And so then when he told me you can actually do it, like you have the capacity to do it, I told him that's what I wanted. And so he would start giving me blueprints, take them home, do material takeoffs, do cost estimates, do time estimates and things like that. And
was all that for free?
Yep, absolutely. He did.
So for you, the knowledge was worth more, like the extra work for the quotes and everything.
Yeah.
Were you doing all that labor for free?
Yes, at home. Yeah, I would do it at home in the evenings, yeah.
So gaining that knowledge of how to do that was more worth it than getting $1 for your work.
Oh, absolutely. I never even considered charging him for it, because what he was doing, I found this out later. He told me this later. I was under the impression at the time that I was the only one doing material takeoffs for those jobs. But what he was doing is he was doing the material takeoffs as well. And then he would see if mine matched his. Right. And so it was a learning thing, but it was the first few I did. Obviously he was seconding all of them and making sure that things were done accurately. Right.
That's really interesting, because I know one of the biggest common denominators with all ultra wealthy people are willing to do work more than what they're actually paid to do.
That's correct. Yeah.
So in the same way, in this experience, you're willing to go above and beyond what you're actually paid to do just for the sake of learning how to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the other thing that he always commented on, I asked him this later, what made you think that I had the ability to run a construction business? And he goes, well, they called me Jake 719, right? Because we'd start work at 7:30 in clients' houses, so we wouldn't show up before 7:30. They could not show up at 7 or 6 o'clock and start working because they were still living there very often. But customers or clients, they would say, yeah, Jake is here at 7:19. He pulls up into the job, and we see him outside, and he's getting things ready, pulling tools out of the job, plugging things in, getting the compressor going before anybody shows up. Right. And so he says, you show up, and I would always stay until 5:15. I was 90% of the time, I was the last one to leave the job site, make sure everything was cleaned up, tucked away, no cords laying around. Stairs were vacuumed in clients' houses. I'd be the last one to go out and drag the vacuum cleaner in the drop sheets, right? And so that was actually one of his comments is, you just do things because you'll be paid for them. So it didn't matter to me whether it was an extra half hour a week or a day that I worked, right? So yeah, that actually makes sense.
Perfect. So you worked there for 5 years.
5 years, yep.
So that puts you at 24, 25-ish. What happens? What gets you into the contracting world?
So we started the business in Ontario just before we left in 2006. So we came here to Alberta in 2005 for a holiday, and we really enjoyed it here and liked it here. And we had friends and family that lived here that had little kids that were going to school. And we happened to talk to a lot of people about the education system here, and it seemed better here than it was in Ontario, right? And so one of the big reasons that we decided to move here was school for you guys. That was one of the big motivating factors, because I actually had a pretty good future in Ontario because that same contractor, he offered me his business, right? But we decided to move here. And so in 2006, I started my business, incorporated it federally. So because we had already planned to move here in 2007, we finally made the move and started work here. Yeah.
Okay. And then you, just in total, how long did you end up contracting for?
I still do some.
When did it officially not become the main thing?
Okay. When did it officially not become a thing? Probably so we opened our first financial services office here, our own, in 2000 and would have been pre-COVID, or just before COVID. So whatever that was, 2019, 2020, early 2020 maybe. No, it was September of 2019.
So you went from contracting and construction, which was, you were still very hands-on, into financial planning.
Yeah.
What did that transition look like, and what tempted you to make that drastic of a change?
Oh, very hiccupy. There was a lot of stuff going on at the time. So in 2016, I don't know if you remember how sick I was, 2015, 16. I had the surgeries and all of that.
Partially. I probably don't remember quite as well as you do.
Yeah, I ended up in the hospital a few times. Turns out I had a pretty severe case of asthma. And so what ended up happening was, it's a bit of a longer story, so I maybe people could be completely bored to hear this. But so 2016-ish, I got very sick. The 2015, I got very sick, ended up having endoscopic sinus surgery once, and then got sick again, had to have it again, ended up in the hospital for a couple of days. And so long story short, the doctors realized that I was being very much, and I'm not sure how to word that, oxygen depletion, a lot more than I should be. And I just couldn't catch my breath ever. And so they finally, after all those surgeries, and they finally said, you know what, we think you have asthma, so let's try treating it with some inhalers. So we tried that, and it was like, wow, I can breathe. And I was so happy. And they're like, yeah, it's asthma. It's interesting that the medicine that cures it is what proves what the sickness is. But anyway, maybe I got something completely different. Still get treated like asthma. But anyway, so 2015, I started looking at other opportunities. And so we looked at buying a farm implementation sales and rental business. I've worked with those guys for about 6 months, traveled around, did farm shows, met their clients and customers and stuff. And in the end, they ended up selling it to one of the owners' nephews, which I suppose if they wanted to keep it in the family. And so ended up not doing that. And then I looked at, so I went to Bow Valley College in Calgary. I took the immigration practitioner course, right? And so I did that. And at the same time, I was introduced to financial services as a business we'll talk about that experience a little bit later, I think. But anyway, and so I had a choice. I could either do the financial services or the immigration work, because the powers that be, especially the Mutual Fund Dealers Association at the time, said you can't do both, because if I'm working with newcomers and I'm potentially handling all of their finances, the potential for abuse was too high, right? And interestingly enough, I heard very recently a story about a lawyer who had actually done that. He was an immigration lawyer, and so what ended up happening was he would overcharge people, and these were all Polish immigrants. He would overcharge people, and they actually didn't know what he was charging them for, and a whole bunch of them got deported. And he's like, well, I guess the government didn't accept you as permanent residents or Canadian citizens, and it turns out he never did their work, right? And so that's the type of thing that they're trying to prevent. I actually listened to that story, and I went, okay, I understand what they were trying to tell me back then, right? And so they made me make a choice. You either keep your because I had my immigration practitioner license for 1 year. And so you either get rid of those and get your financial services license, or you get rid of one and keep the other. And so I chose financial services in the end.
Now, what was so tempting for you about the financial services industry?
So that's kind of interesting, because when I was introduced to the guy who actually ended up training me in the end, we had a little bit of money saved, and for the new home warranty program, you have to have some money in the bank so you can have a letter of credit, meaning you're a company that can actually build some houses and stand behind the product if there's a financial issue on the job, right? And for us, they wanted to see a $10,000 letter of credit from the bank, and that had to be in a GIC or some form of an account in the bank that they could give a letter of credit for. So I didn't know any different, so we put it in the GIC, and this is 2014, 15? Yeah, somewhere in there. So we put that $10,000 specifically into a GIC, and when this guy introduced me to mutual funds, he said, you can get like 8, 9, 10, even more % per year on that, right? And I kind of laughed at him, like, yeah, I'm getting 1% at the bank, okay? don't tell me stuff like that. Like and we had a rental property at the time we were renting out. I had built 20 houses on my own or more at the time. We had done some commercial development. I knew some things about business, right? And he's like, no, you. And then so he ended up giving me some, account information or mutual fund information and company information. And he said, here, go check these out and come back to me. And so I went and I did it, and a week and a half later or whatever it was, I finally called him and I'm like, yeah, you're right. You actually can do that.
Now if there's a viewer out there who is, maybe thinking the same thing, they have their money in a GIC getting, 2.5%, 3% right now, and they think they're killing the financial game.
Or 5 even, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe they're in a higher one, but they think they're growing tremendously on their money. What's just an account that they could just type into Google and just look at the... The first one that comes to my mind, and this is the one that he gave me at the time, was AGF, the American Growth Class, right? It's their flagship fund. They've had it since 1957. It's been around forever. It's got billions of dollars in it. And it has produced more than 9% compounding since the day it opened, per year since it opened. That's what it's averaged.
That's what it's averaged, yeah. Now, it hasn't every year, but that's what it's averaged. 2022 was obviously a down year. It actually went down by 9%. But this is where that particular fund, and I probably shouldn't talk about that fund specifically, but I can say that if you want to look for some evidence of it, it's there. And this guy gave me a list. He gave me some of Mackenzie's, some Franklin Templeton, some Invesco, some Fidelity, and he's like, go do the research. Any fund that is in equity, that's a medium risk fund that's been around for more than 10 years, if it hasn't averaged 9 or 10%, it's not worth investing. And I kind of went, you are an idiot and you're a liar, right? Originally.
And so if there's anyone, listening thinking that exact same thing, just
go check.
Yeah, go check the fund that we just listed.
Yep. Go check.
Yeah, say the name one more time for them.
Well, there's different funds in each company, but the one that he gave me and the one that I think people should look at is AGF's American Growth Class, right?
Perfect. Just a place to start.
Just a place to start.
To make sure there's some company out there, a credible company that handles billions of dollars that will get you 9 or 10% on average.
On average, yeah.
It is possible.
Yeah. And so I went back to the bank and I'm like, or actually, interestingly enough, right during that time, the 1 year was up and my banker called and he's like, yeah, it's time to renew your GIC that you have in your corporation here in your business. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. So I went in and he's like, so we're going to have to renew it. And your cost to renew is $125, right?
And you had $10,000 in this GIC.
Yeah. And so I said, so you're charging me $25 a year to keep my money. And he's like, well, no, we're charging you $125, but you've made $100. I said, no, if you subtract 100 from the fee, I'm left paying you $25. That's how math works. And he's like, well, no, you made to $100. And I said, okay, look, here's the deal. I'm also going to pay tax on that $100. And he just kind of sat there and I was a little flustered and he was a little embarrassed, right? As he should be. And needless to say, we ended up moving that money. I popped that over into a mutual fund and gave the same letter of credit to the and it didn't have to be locked in or anything like that. I gave the same letter of credit from AGF at the time to the new home warranty people. And they're like, no, you're good to go. Right. But we had also built under that home warranty program, we had built like 10 houses already. So we had the credibility as well. The letter of credit may not even have been necessary. I don't know that. I never tested that. Right?
So you're thinking, you're thinking about joining or at this point, you're pretty much committed to joining the financial services industry.
Yeah,
to some
absolutely.
degree.
Well, because the evidence was there, right? But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, just like you saw the evidence that it worked for average people to invest money, right?
Yeah.
Or what drew you so much to the industry that made you think, I want to work in this industry?
Well, there was a couple of key things, but one of them was, and we can talk about the other ones, but the biggest factor was, so I would pull up this information on my phone or I'd print it out on these papers and I would go and talk to people that I knew, right? Other contractors, sub-trades, suppliers, family members. I would show them this stuff and say, hey, did you know that you can get 10%, 9%, 12%, in some years 25%? And they were like, no, that's not true. No, that's not true. Not one person that I talked to said, yeah, I'm doing that. Sorry, except for one, but it was 3 years later. Right. And he's like, yeah, I've been doing this for about 5 years. And I went, why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Right. And he's like, well, I thought everybody knew. And I'm like, what do you mean nobody? Anyway, so that was the biggest thing. I looked at that and I went, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And so I went, somebody has to go out there and tell them. It's almost like I had the same. and I've used this before, is if you know these things about money, you have an obligation to tell people, right? The same thing, once you know the gospel, you're obligated to tell people. The gospel, death, burial, resurrection of Christ. That's the good news. You should tell people about it.
And in a sense, that's what makes it so sellable for you, is the fact that you so firmly believed it. Like, there's so many people I see trying to get into sales, and they're selling stuff that they wouldn't even buy themselves.
Yeah.
And yet they expect to sell it.
Yeah.
But for you and in your industry, it's the exact opposite.
It's the exact opposite, yeah. So I would say that there's lots of research out there, and maybe we'll cite some of it in the comments, that shows, in terms of life insurance, right? That's a good example of what you just mentioned. The average life insurance sales agent that sells whole life or universal life does not have it. I think they figure like 90% of them do not have their own policy.
That should be the only red flag you need.
That's exactly right. I firmly believe in, if you buy a term policy and if you're investing money properly, you never need a permanent life insurance policy. I firmly believe that, and that's what I have for myself. That's what I have for all my clients. I would never sell somebody a whole life policy because I just don't believe that they are designed to collapse.
Well, the only reason you'd even need a permanent life insurance policy is if you plan on not getting wealthy enough to have a good backup for if something bad happens.
Then it's almost like your objective is to die poor.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That is literally the objective. Excuse me, right? And so it's like, but anyway, so for me, the biggest thing, the principle behind it is very, very simple. If it works, do it. It's cheaper and better for your longevity or for your family's longevity. Intergenerational wealth cannot be built on you plan on being poor. It cannot.
Yeah, so now you've been in the financial services industry for a good, what's it been, 7 or 8 years, roughly?
Yeah, since 2000. I got licensed. My LLQP came through, so my life insurance license came through in 2017. My financial services license, my securities license came through in May of 2018. So I took the course that winter, right, for the securities, and it took them a while to issue it because I had three corporations that I was involved in, director on 2 of them, and then we had some rental properties and things like that we had with a few other people as partnerships. So the more partnerships you have, the harder it is to get securities license because they suspect you using them for fraud. Right. But so it took about 6 months for them to issue my license with like 4 phone calls and interviews. And they're like, what are you actually doing? But anyway, in May, they finally came through.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So you had quite the drastic change in your career. I mean, you went from being completely hands-on in construction, building up a construction contracting company, and then just doing a 180 and going to a service company.
Yeah.
So, but including all of that together, what skill has given you the most ROI? Or if you could tell somebody, this is a skill you have to learn, what would that be?
It's hard to think of it as a skill because when I started in construction, as this, like I said earlier, this farm kid from Mexico with no education, I was very, very self-conscious and very self-aware of who I was in the sight of others, or that's what I believed I was. Like I felt myself as being worth nothing, right? And so I could never attain a level of confidence where I could look somebody in the eye and speak to them. Like I would not, like if we went to a client's house, I would avoid looking at the client or avoid speaking with the client. It was, they were just, and mind you, we had all our clientele that we worked for, where a lot of them were doctors and lawyers type, right? And so I looked at them as this status person, a person with a status that I couldn't attain, right? Or be. And so I looked at myself as a lot less value, right? And so it's not, so when I talk about a skill that gives you the most ROI, so that's where I came from, that's who I was. So I had I had an identity crisis, right? Or a lot of identity issues. But so I would say that the skill that gives anybody the highest ROI is really 3 things. And I don't know if you want to call it a skill, is you must see other people as the same value as what you are in the sight of God, right? Without that, all skills fall apart, in my opinion. And so you have to see yourself as equal. You can't look at people as being above you or beneath you, right? They cannot be. It must be on. So once you're on equal footing with everybody, like I mean everybody, and I think I've told this story before about my boss. He said, he gave me a line that said, I don't care if you meet a pig farmer's helper who's scooping poop, or you meet the president of the United States. You look them in the eye and you say, good day, sir. How are you doing? And have the, I can't remember what he called it, and have the meaningfulness and mean it, or something like that, right? And mean it, have the relationship to mean it, right? Look them in the eye, say, hello, sir, how are you doing? And mean it, right? And so I would say that, coupled with two other things, and one is precise communication. Tell people exactly what it is that you're there to do. What can you do for them? What can they do for you? So when I approach a business owner and I'm going to do business with them, or the plan to do business, I tell them exactly that. Hey, I work in this field. I invest people's money. I make sure they're properly set up for insurance. This is how I do it. Do you think that you and I could do business? Well, no, not really. I said, okay, what would change your mind? Well, you'd have to prove that the business is worthy of, that you're worthy of doing business with you, or that the product is worth it, right? And that's where the third part comes in. And that is that you have to be convinced with full conviction that the product you have is actually the best for that person and for yourself. So very often, especially in the insurance and investment industry, you find people selling products that they don't have personally, right? And I've seen it with a bunch of people over the course of my financial career as well, is that people will join a business and get into financial services of some sort, but they themselves have no investments, and their own financial life is a mess. You have no business being in that sales position and giving other people advice until you are established. Doesn't mean you're wealthy, but that you have it under control and you know what you're doing, right? So I would say those three things. One is
just to be clear, that's the reason why I'm interviewing you right now, not vice versa.
Well, just like I said, just because you're, and I don't consider that we are wealthy. Now, we are wealthy compared to many, but we are not wealthy compared to many, right?
Or even maybe compared to where you want to be eventually.
Or where we are going to be eventually, yeah. And if we keep on the trajectory, and the other thing is hard work. Like, what skill pays off the most is hard work. Never, ever, ever underestimate the power of a work ethic. Get up early in the morning, go to work and do your thing, and come back and save money. Like, and maybe that's not even a skill, and I kind of keep adding things to the skill set, but I would say the three things: understand who you are, precise communication, tell people what you want and why you're there, and number three is, if you're not using the products or services you're selling, you have no business selling them. You must be. So again, when I get somebody invested into a portfolio, I am also invested in that portfolio, and I know that 90% of the time, the portfolios I build for people are the best. They're the highest rate of return with the least amount of risk. That I know with absolute certainty. There are some out there, but it's only because I don't know of them, right?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Now, in terms of that first one, the communication and knowing who you are, did you have more of a struggle looking to people higher than you and being, I'm not like them, they're like a more valuable human than me? Or did you have trouble looking down on people and being they are less than me?
So I actually experienced both. There was a time where I really, really did not see myself as value. And then, like I said, my boss at the time and a few others kind of took me aside and really made me feel very special. And through them, I found out that because I had a very, very high capacity to learn. I could learn just about anything within a couple of days, right? And so because I knew I had that capacity to learn, I would absorb piles and piles and piles of information from people, from books, I'd listen to the radio at work. Of course, there was only radio, and I'd listen to, ironically enough, my coworker was involved in a multi-level marketing company, and so they would put out all these CDs and stuff. So he would listen to them on job site, and so I would just absorb everything. And so I mentally transitioned from a guy who viewed himself as almost nothing. Well, the other thing too was we were at the Old Colony Mennonite Church at the time, and I was involved with the church very early on. And even the preachers and everybody that was there would, because I was a Sunday school teacher and a few other things, they would kind of lift up people that were in service in the church, right? Right or wrong, they would do that. And so because all those things happened, I came to a conclusion somewhere along the way that I really was smarter than most people, right? Because I would talk about things that I had learned or heard or read, and people wouldn't know them, right? And so there was a transition where I went from that to where I really looked down on people that didn't know. And I kind of thought people were idiots if they didn't know. Because if I can know, you can know. That's how I kind of looked at it. And so I kind of became fairly abrasive, I think is the way I'd look at it. I became I ended up in a lot of solitude because of that. And so that's a whole story all on its own. But my mind towards all of that really changed in 2013 when I became born again, when I became a Christian, when I got saved actually. And all of a sudden I saw, it's hard to explain or hard to define, but there was a moment, and that's a whole different conversation, where all of a sudden I saw how I viewed people and how unbelievably awful that was, not just for life, but for business and for family and for church, and biblically how unbelievably horrible that was, right? And so that was the kind of the third transition, right? And then all of a sudden I went and I remembered what this ungodly man, I shouldn't say ungodly, lost man who was not born again, my old boss, he'd be like, yeah, Jake, I've read the Bible front to back. I know what happens when you die. It's just dark. They bury you, right? But anyway, so he treated me better as a lost man than lost man being me, than I was treating other Christians now, right? And so I saw all of that. So that was kind of the third transition. And now I just kind of view people as equal. Look, in the sight of God, we're all equal, right? So that's very different.
And would you say you almost, I would even say that what I've noticed from your career is that you have portrayed that same belief into your business, right? If somebody is coming to you investing $25 a month because they only make, they're taking home $4,000 a month, they'll get the same level of financial service as somebody that's coming to you and investing multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Absolutely. Yep. So one of the things that I have kind of thought about a lot is, and this was because the way that, yeah, you're right. All of those three things, if you look at those three ways that I looked at life, I've seen it from three different perspectives, I think, the last one being the most preferable. I know that the average person that walks in to my office and is looking for some financial advice or looking to invest some money, whether they're making $100,000 or $5,000 a year, or they've got $1 million to invest, or they got $25 a month to invest, the level of, it's the word I'm looking for, the level of care that they have for that is exactly the same.
The money means the same amount to them, essentially.
That's right. Yeah. Because if you work a whole year and you manage to save up $5,000, that's your whole year's worth. And if you work a whole year and you end up saving $100,000, well, you still worked a whole year for that $100,000. It's almost like we have an unconscious relationship between time and money. We know it, right?
And time is essentially the same valuable to all of us.
That's correct.
We don't spend it as wisely.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've kind of thought about here recently is that, and this is very recent, is that when we say time is money, we cheapen its value.
Because money is time.
Because time is way more valuable than time.
Right.
Sorry, time is way more valuable than money. Let me phrase that the right way.
But money becomes more valuable when we realize that money in reverse is also time.
That's correct. Yeah. So we don't want to cheapen so I don't want to take the guy, what I mean by that is that the guy that's saved $5,000 over the course of his year of income, a whole year of work, I don't want to cheapen his time, cheapen the value of his time by saying you've only got $5,000. Right? Yeah. It's very valuable to him because it spent a whole year at it. Right. So that's how I think about it is when we say that time is money, we cheapen its value. Yeah. Yeah,
totally. So what would you do different at any point in your career? Would you have made certain decisions later or earlier?
That depends.
Would you have chosen a different field?
I like the financial services field. I like that field. The other thing I would say is to have different experiences work-wise throughout your life is very beneficial, because it always gives you a perspective from somebody else. Having worked with plumbers and electricians and excavators and concrete finishers, having helped a bunch of them on site gave me an interesting perspective on where they came from, right? So that has helped me now in the financial services industry, but also researching other businesses like the farm rental sales and rental farm implement sales and rental business gave me a whole different perspective on farmers that I hadn't had, at least not here, right? So to say that I would do a lot of things different, it depends on whether I could know what I know now or not, I suppose. But I would say that the transition from farm to construction was really difficult for me. I don't know that everybody struggles with that. But I would say that I don't know that I would, I think I would transition more carefully with more forethought, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So let's say there is a 20-year-old in construction,
Yeah.
exact same shoes you were in 20 years ago. What advice would you give to the person in that moment?
20-year-old in construction just starting out, I would say probably the biggest advice is, I would say two things. One, save as much money as possible, because the definition of luck is opportunity meets savings, right?
What do you mean when you say it? Explain how that's practical.
There's a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, all biblical principles, financial principles. And the definition in there is of a guy who shows up with some gold at a gate into the city of Babylon. And there's a farmer out there who also ended up out there getting locked out because they couldn't get in. They didn't show up in time. And he's got a herd of sheep there, and he just gets news that his dad has died and he needs to go back home. And this guy shows up at the gate as well, and he's just a guy with some money, some gold. And the sheep herder says, I can sell you all my sheep, and I can sell them to you at a discounted price because I have to go home. I was going to go into town, spend a month selling them for a profit, and then go home, but I have to go home now. So I will let you make the profit as long as I get my money. Well, he happened to have the money on him to buy the sheep. And so he went in, spent the next month selling them and made a profit. Was he lucky to show up there? Was the other guy lucky? Was he lucky that guy's dad died? Do you know what I mean?
Like, in a sense, how many opportunities would the average person run into that are $1 million opportunities if only they had that $10,000 sitting around to pursue it?
Many. And that's the other thing is, so I would say that the other skill level to add to that is make sure that you have the ability to learn. Never, ever. Like, the biggest hindrance to today's financial struggles that people have is they're not learning, right? And so the 20-year-old, I would say, start looking for at least 2 or 3 streams of income. Doesn't have to come right away. Maybe the first one comes 5 years from now when you've got some savings. The third one comes when you're 35 and you've got more savings.
Now you're talking about streams of income. What does that look like for your average 20-year-old? What is the best place to get those places of income?
Probably different, very different for each individual. I had actually somebody ask me that not long ago. Where am I supposed to get my second stream of income from? And I went, I don't know. Start selling something to people that need it. And she just went, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, it means something very different for me than it does for you. So to somebody, one of the things that people that are financial services advisors or salespeople, if you want to call them that, they are almost kind of anti-real estate. Whereas I'm going, okay, to the 20-year-old, save up enough money to you have a down payment for a house that you can buy and rent out. Not live in, just buy and rent it out. Make sure it cash flows $400 or $500 a month. Make sure that $400 or $500 then gets invested into mutual funds. So if somebody says, okay, I got 20 grand or 50 grand or 100 grand saved now, I feel like buying, what should I do? Buy a house or buy mutual funds? I'm like, that's not an and question. That's a both. The answer is always both. Right.
Yeah, and right there, you're already at 3 streams because you have your job, your rental, and your mutual funds.
That's correct. Yeah, now you have 3 streams of income, right? And who knows? Maybe there's something at your work that you can make for cheaper than whoever their supplier is buying it from, or whoever their supplier is. Maybe you can make that at home and with your wife and with your kids, and you can produce that and sell it to your person that you're working for. It's always a possibility. What I mean by that is, to be able to learn those skills that you need, learn the information, and learn to look around for opportunity.
And based off of what you did, that might even mean doing very cheap labor for a certain amount of time until you understand what to do better.
Oh,
like
absolutely.
when you're doing blueprints and whatnot all for free and all these quotes, even though your labor was free, it was very beneficial in the long
That's
run.
correct. Yep.
So now let's move over to like you became a contractor at 25, 26, I believe.
26, yeah.
26, perfect. So somebody just entering the contracting world or hoping to enter the contracting world, what advice would you give that person to
Contracting specifically or any business?
let's go any business where you're starting something that's like reliant on you, something similar to the contracting where you have the scalability of hiring an employee and you want a very happy clientele. What would your advice be to that person?
Well, two things. One is employees are more important than clients. That's one. Because if employees are treated like gold, they will produce very happy clients. Right? That is sometimes fairly controversial in the contracting world or in any business. But the more I watch businesses, the more I believe that's the key. The other one I would say is, and it's a little bit more broad, but what I'm going to say is that the third year is the hardest. Right? So do you want me to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Why is the third year the hardest?
Third year is the hardest because in the first year, you get started, maybe you're working by yourself. In the 6 months in, you start to hire some people. You take on bigger projects, you hire some people. By the end of the first year, you've made a little bit of money. You're taking on a little bit bigger projects. You file your taxes and you have like a year and 6 months to file your taxes. And then you have another 3 months to actually pay the taxes. And I'm getting the time probably wrong, but you have some time to pay your taxes, to file, and then you have a little bit more time to pay your taxes. So now you're towards the end of the second year. Well, towards the end of your second year, if all is going well, you're taking on even bigger projects. You've got more overhead. You're paying employees more wages. You've got more employees. And then you're in the third year and your taxes have just been paid from that first year. And now you have all this other overhead and you need to hire one more employee to be able to fill those contracts, right? So it just seems like that somewhere in the first quarter of the third year of business, everything just catches up to you if your business is growing.
It's almost like the make or break of the business.
It's the make or break of the business. And so the advice that I would give is just like I say to the 20-year-old who's starting work, save your money because the third year will be hard.
And is it fair to say that like the expenses will come, whether that's like the taxes, the employee,
absolutely.
material? That's when all the expenses.
There will be an
piling
accident. There will be an unforeseen expense. You'll need to buy more equipment, more trucks, more whatever. The expenses, trust me, they're there. And so if you have cash, you're fine. If you're borrowing money, you're in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you switched over and you were roughly 35 when you became a financial advisor.
Yep.
So somebody entering the service-based industry, maybe even the financial industry, where you don't need employees, like the scalability options are there, but more so you're trying to provide a service to a client. How do you flourish in that industry?
That's a good question. I need to ask a few people. I would say that's actually, so get 100 clients and service them well.
What does servicing clients
talk to them every
like?
6 months, update their kids' birthdays, update their addresses, make sure everything's up to date, talk to them every 6 months and make sure they're doing okay. So that's for me because, and I'm just going to be completely honest with you about this. That has been my weakest link in any business because in construction, I did it for, like I said, I still do some, I still get calls for some contracting and I still do some of it, but it's always the client calling, always has been. I was good at construction and I always had clients until I got so sick. And so for me, that has been that mindset shift, that mindset. It's almost like I need a redo on it still, and I'm working on it constantly. But clients would call me constantly. I never, ever reached out to a client. And so it came to a point where there was so many people calling me all the time that wanted me to work all the time that clients became a burden, right? And so now I've got 350 clients and I still feel that way sometimes. When I talk to clients, they are the best thing in the world, right? and I enjoy talking with each and every one of them. But to actually get my mind wrapped around, okay, every 6 months you got to call this person and this person, so you got to call constantly, talking to people constantly. And talking to people constantly is literally my joy. I enjoy it. I love doing it. But I can't wrap my mind around the fact that they're not going to call me. I'm constantly thinking, how come none of my clients are calling me? And then I realize, oh, no, wait. In this business, it's your job. You need to be calling them, right? So I would say that's one. The second and third is the communication. If you're starting out in kind of a service-based industry, especially in this industry, is the effective communication, and you better be in the products you're selling. If you're not in them, you have no business in it. Right. That's kind of how I think about it.
So if you're a client out there and you're wondering why this guy hasn't called me,
because I'm expecting you to call.
Although I'm sure that call's coming your way.
Yeah. Oh,
and
for
any
sure.
time now, here soon.
Yeah.
So, well, my next question is going to be, what's something you plan on doing different that you may have only realized in the last couple of years? But it seems like that would be the thing.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Taking care of your clients.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, and the other thing too is, so there would be two things. That would be one. And the other reason that, because I am so, there's different styles of people that think differently. I'm almost 100% visionary, right? Visionaries have a very, very hard time with the day-to-day stuff, right? And so I get distracted by opportunity constantly. I look at something and I go, like, as an example, I'll sit down in the office and I'll go, okay, I got a list of clients here. I'm going to make these calls today. And I come across the first one. Well, this person does this and this for a living. Okay, we got that. And I look at what he does and I go, wonder how somebody could build a business out of that. And I get completely sidetracked, right? And so I think for me, one of the big things I have to do is I have to figure out a way to hone in, either put people in place to take care of the businesses that are worth taking care of, and then shift my mindset into the driving force is me calling people. And it doesn't matter which business it's in. It needs to be the other way.
So it seems like you almost lose your focus on your main business because there's always a more attractive opportunity, or it looks more attractive.
It doesn't even have to be more attractive. It just has to be there.
Right.
That's the crazy thing about it, is that even if it's like, it's not even that attractive, and it's like, but it's there. Right? And so I get really, really unfocused. So that's a huge mental challenge of mine, especially like the more, how should I word this? The more savings you have, the more opportunity you have, the more distracted you are. That's how it is for me. But there are people that are not like that. Like you take, and we've talked about this in the past, is we had a barbecue in our backyard, an event, and a guy came down from Calgary who makes over $1 million every single year, and you couldn't pick him out of the crowd. He
was wearing flip-flops and cargo shorts and was going around talking to everyone.
Yeah, he was just a normal dude, right? But he is so honed in on what he's good at. He is so zoned in on it, and he does a phenomenal job at what he does. And I asked him, like, what is your secret to this thing? And he said, Jake, you are so distracted. And I said, yeah, but, and he's like, your problem is you're a visionary. You need to get rid of it. And I went, no, but it's very important. And he said, it is, but you need to use the visionary skills in one business. He said, you would do phenomenal.
Yeah. Which for anyone not quite getting it, what he's trying to say is, like, if you divide 100 by 4, you don't get 25 equal slices. You get 4 slices of maybe 15, maybe 20, but you lose a 5-10% along the way.
Oh, for sure you do.
And so you're left with, instead of having 100 split up, you're left with maybe 75 split up or 80 split up.
But then people make the argument, but Elon Musk, somebody like that, how many businesses does he run? And he's capable of doing it. It's like, no, he has very competent people in each business. He does not physically run all of them.
And if I can make an argument for him, it seems like he builds up a massive company, devoting all his time to it, hands it off to qualified people like you're saying, and then does the same thing for the next company.
Yeah, and if you can do that, awesome.
His actual attention isn't divided because he's focusing on one company at a time.
That's correct. Yeah. That's exactly right. And so that's the advice I have received from a few people here in the last year and a half or so. on more than one occasion, people that are very successful and very good at what they do. They say, Jake, your problem is you move on to the next business before you have people in place. There's nothing wrong with your vision. It's fantastic, but you need to put people in place before you move on, or stay at it yourself, one of the two. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. So that kind of follows from 20 years old to your average 40-year-old, I guess, and two completely different industries as well.
Yeah.
You have one where you're working alone, service-based. You have one where you can hire employees. You work with your hands.
Yep.
Make clients happy with that. So I think everyone can learn something from this episode.
I think so. I certainly did.
You were the one talking.
I know. That's what I mean. We think when we talk, and we talk when we think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the other thing I would say about entering into business for yourself, I had a conversation with a guy, and he was a heating and cooling guy, and I asked him, what would you prefer now looking back, being in business for yourself or working for somebody else? And he says, well, it used to be that my boss told me which 40 hours a week I work, and now I get to choose which 80 hours a week I work. And I'm like, really? And he goes, you work twice as hard, doesn't mean you make twice as much money, but it compounds, and eventually I will. But yeah. I know I have to put in 80 hours a week, where I used to, my boss told me show up at 7, go home at 5.
And the truth of the matter is there's nothing wrong with working for somebody. There's nothing less noble about that.
No, absolutely not.
It'll be a little bit less challenging, right?
Yep.
But there's still plenty of money to be made. If you invest that properly, your potential is still very, very high.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I would actually say this to somebody who is 30 years old, 30 to 35, and you are working for somebody else, and you're making your $35 to $45 an hour. Let's just even say $25 to $45 an hour. You can retire with $1.5 million.
Very easily.
Very easily. Yeah. Like really easily. Once you know what to do, it's shockingly easy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is kind of the whole joy of our business, is we get to show people that simplicity. Yep. And all it takes is a couple calculations that anyone can do. Yep. And based off the returns we were talking about that have proven themselves to be accurate.
Yeah. And discipline. Takes so much discipline.
Yeah, just every month. Every month, put in an investment.
You got to put some money away every single month. But I think that is one of the things that I've thought about a lot, is that investing should be a lifestyle. You just do it.
Yeah, I remember even when I think it was 13 or 14, probably younger than that actually, when you set up my first investment account.
Yeah.
And then when I finally actually got a job, then my automatic instinct was just to keep on investing. And since then it's never stopped.
Yeah.
Right? Because even before I had income, my instinct what to do with my money was to invest it. Yeah. And as more money comes in, just more money goes out into investing.
More money goes into the investment account. Yeah. So I think that pay raises should be treated that way. Last month I got $500 extra, and I invested it. I got a month pay raise now. I've got $600, so now I've got $600 to invest.
Yeah. Maybe in a future episode, we'll have to go through all the most important, basically how to get wealthy with investing. Well,
absolutely.
What all the core principles are: diversification, compound interest, discipline.
Yeah, there are 3 rules that you must follow. Anytime somebody says my investment didn't work, I want to know which rule he broke. Well, I didn't know there was any rules. Okay. Yeah.
Well, they'll have to go over that. But as for now, do you have any closing remarks for anyone listening?
I think learn to learn, love learning, and savings meets opportunity. That's the definition of luck, I would say. Those are, if you get that drilled into your head, and then investing becomes a lifestyle, or it must become a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is do a net worth statement every 6 months. Write it down.
Just make sure it's always going up. You're always on the right track.
Yeah. Yeah. If it goes down once and then it goes back up again the next time, that's fine. But at least you're tracking it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Key. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
And if anyone wants to learn more, we're located in Hiebert, Alberta. We'll leave our phone number and contact information.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description and stuff. Yeah.
The comments, the show notes.
Sure.
I'm sure you'll be able to find it
awesome.
if you just scroll down. Perfect. Thanks for watching, guys.